moment, though, just to...
I'm really interested in this, for this particular topic, or...
generally, what was your...
I'm really interested in this idea of like a lateral architecture and a lateral power. I don't know if you've like read or aware of the idea of the third industrial revolution.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that like kick-started something for you. I don't know, have you read the book or flicked through the idea or...
Kickstarted, sorry?
Yeah, well, I don't know, kick-started this idea of like spreading out your duty, I guess, like as an architect, allowing someone else to adopt it. Because I think what's so interesting is, I mean, you said like you're from a traditional background of architecture, but you, and in that, you know, there's all this, you want it this way, but you say you feel like very relaxed about how it ends up, and you don't mind, and it's probably more interesting to put that out.
Yeah, exactly that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, basically, so the way our practice sort of has always operated is we've got a strong sense that architecture is a discipline which is important in the sense that it's kind of pervasive. It's sort of at least the kind of object of architecture, the built environment, is a kind of pervasive thing in the sense that it's sort of societal at scale and importance. But the discipline of architecture as a sort of taught thing has become increasingly kind of what's the word, sort of niched and professionalised in the sense that even in the way we as architects are trained and often think, it's all about kind of control. It's about like the object,
your own touch and statement.
And in that sense, you know, it's a bit it's an oversimplistic thing to say, but in the sort of idea of architecture as an art, and architecture as a sort of process, and architecture as a sort of science, increasingly we've sort of become the person that owns our particular art, you know. Whereas from the very beginning of our practice, what we've been interested more is sort of, okay, what are the processes that architecture deals with, how does it engage with society, and what you sort of start, and what, at least the way we see it, is what you start to explore more is the idea that there's an economy, which is sort of something most architects don't talk about, you know, the economy, if you like. Whereas actually it's fundamental to what dictates the parameters and the context within which architecture operates.
What an architect can actually do.
And that's one aspect. Then there's the kind of cultural and social context, like whether it's sort of the simple things about, you know, the cultural heritage of the place you're in, or whether it's actually much deeper in the sense of how does architecture affect kind of culture, and how does culture influence architecture in different contexts. You know, so all these, in other words, what I mean is all these sort of lateral forces that push architecture one way or the other are the sorts of things that we think architects could actually be more embracing of, and actually think about how they have a positive impact on, rather than simply be pigeonholed by them.
I mean, do you feel that's so pressing, like now, in terms of society, I don't know, issues, economic issues today, as...
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think it's come to bear, it's sort of been brought to the fore more by things like the, you know, current recession and all this sort of, the kind of current climate, in the sense that suddenly, even from very sort of, you know, day-to-day things like how you deal with clients and things, suddenly the sort of pressures that normally, or many architects try and ignore, sort of, they have to operate within them, but they choose not to have any impact on them, become increasingly a pressure on how you operate. Before even the recession though, we've sort of thought, well, those things are just always a given. The fact that recession is kind of means everyone's talking about money is sort of suddenly it's kind of brought to bear.
It's always been.
But it's all, that is just the world you operate within. And so the question then becomes, well, how do you feel that you provide value?
Right.
Now,
to an individual, or to like...
Yeah, or to the project, to the community, to the individual, to whoever, to whatever the context of the thing that you're engaged in. And so, in other words, sometimes a building isn't even the right answer, and there's a sort of default assumption that because architecture has been about the physical act of construction, the processes that get involved in putting together an object called a building, that, you know, increasingly we're being pressurised by the fact that, you know, the construction industry, or the sort of the discipline of construction has been sort of diversified into all these sorts of niche specialisms. You know, you get people sort of bemoaning the fact that suddenly kind of, oh, the engineer's doing this and the planner's doing that, and we're sort of stuck.
And it's not the way you want to do it.
Yeah, and you're sort of stuck in the middle. Well, yeah, to some extent, yes. You know, the world changes and you have to sort of realign how you operate. But fundamentally, we think, well, is that really what the architect's role is? In other words, to try and operate within all these increasing constraints to get the object as great as it can be? Or is it to go, well, actually, the role of the architect there is to provide a different sum of value that these other disciplines aren't necessarily there to do? So whereas other disciplines might have a very technical attitude to what it is they're trying to solve, and in some cases, you know, that's fundamentally necessary. You know, you're dealing with a structural engineering problem.
You need to solve the structural.
Yeah, exactly. It's got to stack up, and there's a whole load of issues related. But in a sense, if you just map that same thinking to what does the shape look like, what materials have you used, how does it feel, and go, well, that's architecture, then yes, of course, that domain is going to get increasingly squeezed by the realities. Whereas if we actually go as, well, architecture is actually not about that, it's about satisfying certain fundamentally social issues, which are encapsulated sometimes in a building, but sometimes not. It's about understanding context in the sense that once you act in any way, once you build, once you sort of reconfigure, you're changing the context, and therefore there will be all sorts of intended and unintended consequences of that you may choose to ignore, or you may really want to understand.
Right.
Now, you know, the point is that we as a practice have always seen ourselves as getting involved in doing buildings, but also wanting to do a whole load of other things, which are much more about kind of how do architects provide value.
Do you have a split basically in your practice, as
in what sense?
Like building in the traditional manner, but like the speaker of, like, you know, you're an architect, you've had this traditional training, and you're going to build something, and then you also have this thing of the wider duty and society taking forth your principles and doing what they wish. Like, do you have such a clear split, or do you feel that there's...
Well, what we'd like to feel is that everything is influencing everything else.
Right.
Of course, I mean, the realities of taking a specific project and running it, or if you like, the logistics, the kind of pragmatics of getting stuff done, means that projects go through various phases, you know, whether it's the kind of, if it's the generic thing of like design, ideation, blah, 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 then getting into detail and then delivery, or whether it's the kind of, right, what is the social research or the social understanding that we need in order to start thinking? Once we start thinking, how do we test some of those and validate some of those thoughts with the people that are around us and that we're operating with? Once there's a kind of general understanding about how we want to act, what is it that we do? You know, so if you like, we've just broadened the spectrum a bit, but we'd like to think everything flows through, if that makes sense.
But do you feel there's like that intent to operate like so outside like the plan of works in a really like basic architectural manner? You know, those plan of works, from my understanding, provide, like, you can then charge for what stage you're at. It's a very traditional process.
Right, I see what you're saying.
You see,
so we
by
do...
taking out of that, how do you feel, how can you actually run as a practice?
So that's a good question, actually. I mean, basically what we've seen in a lot of the stuff we do is that increasingly, you know how we sort of say architectural consultancy, so we as architects are kind of lead consultant. Again, in the very strict sense, most people would think of that as being encapsulated in things like the plan of works. So we're a consultant that provides services from here to there. What we would see is that we're a consultant that provides services that sometimes live totally outside of what the typical RIBA or ARB kind of definition would be. So, for example, some of our strategic, as I say, because it's a multidisciplinary practice, some of the people in the practice aren't even architects, so they don't even deal much themselves in that RIBA stage. But they might be sort of urban geographers and social policy research people who might be working way before that. And what's interesting is that increasingly the people who would typically have come out of architecture school thinking of themselves as being in there have now started broadening as well. So, or have always been since joining practice. But what I mean is that sort of we provide research consultancy work. So the practice in the past has written, you know, books with policy guidance and research guidance on how to do things. Where does that sit in the RIBA stage of works? You know, do you normally charge? It doesn't, but it's still consultancy work, and you can still charge fees for it depending how you roll it. The other thing is stuff like this. although this was never intended to make money. When we first did it, this was a kind of arts project as an open source invitation. The reality is, since doing it, and as I say, particularly interesting is people, well, these guys in New Zealand who, as I said, have pushed it quite a lot forward. They've set up.
So what was the name of them in New Zealand?
Well, they're all a bunch of.
Are they all just students?
Interested individuals? No, not students at all. I mean, and then so background is in engineering and architecture, and they're probably all in their 30s, 40s, 50s, for all I know. But what I was going to say is that what they've seen is that in the context of Christchurch and the earthquake, which was very real for them, that they think it isn't just about here's sort of a benevolently good thing to be doing, but also fundamentally they're interested in the social good, but in parallel they see that, hey, there's business opportunities, they can actually come up with something which is a viable way of building and provide that as a service for people. Now, it's not that they've sort of fixed themselves to anything yet, but it's more that they see it as an entrepreneurial thing as well as a sort of social kind of value thing. And what I was going to say as an extension of that is that a lot of the work we started doing more recently, including, for example, helping to set this place up. Again, what we are doing right now in helping to sort of operate a place like this doesn't live anywhere on the Reaper scale. But equally, it isn't consultancy in the strict sense of we're not just being paid to sort of sit here. So this is more entrepreneurial. We see value in operating a space like this, which is a kind of incubator of ideas and people, and we get a stake in it. So if we operate it in terms of profit, that's good for us. If it doesn't, it didn't work. And so if you think about it in the sense of how do you charge and how do you make money, the question is how inventive do you want to be? Do you want to be a kind of entrepreneurial business person who's doing stuff in parallel to projects? Do you want to convince someone that writing a book is a good piece of consultancy work? Okay, this is, you can go as sort of generic as you like, but what I'm trying to say is we genuinely believe, with our putting my architectural hat on, that there is real scope for architects who fundamentally are trained to think about, even if they don't know that they're being trained this way, to think about basically synthesis, like you're taking input from people, you're taking processes, you're taking understanding of materials, and you're kind of synthesizing them to get something out. Right? On some level, isn't that kind of what architects are doing? If you take that thinking, you go, well, you're also a designer, i.e., the fundamental role of design is to kind of imagine new possibilities and also solve sort of very real problems. Why stop at putting bricks and mortar together?
Do you kind of feel that then there's well, you talk like design, but it's like, as an architect, I don't know, are you qualified as an architect?
Yeah, I'm fully qualified.
Right. So, do you not feel that you have, where do you feel your duty of care lies as an architect?
I would say,
when you talk about all these.
Yeah, I would say fundamentally there's a strong sense of a social duty of care, which extends beyond the sort of typical indemnity liability sort of issues of the building being sound and no one getting hurt and construction, all these things. Those things are fundamentally important. Of course, we have to worry about them. And in fact, things like WikiHouse pose some interesting challenges to these issues, because one of the things which has always been an undercurrent to WikiHouse about is the issue of liability. Like fundamentally, if one wanted to be critical, they'd say, well, this is a kind of dangerous idea because fundamentally someone could put one up and it fall flat on their heads, and because you're saying it's an open source design, you haven't verified what they're doing.
I guess that's the.
How do you see how do you live with yourself with that thinking? And on this stuff, specifically with WikiHouse, what we see is that absolutely there are risks involved in things like this, and just looking at them from a purely protectionist point of view, our insurers would want to know, what are you guys actually saying here? That you put some drawings online, someone builds a house, what happens when it collapses? And absolutely, if you look at it is in a very defensible way, there's things to concern yourself about. But on the flip side,
interest you? Well, it obviously is a concern, but do you feel
it does interest?
Importance.
Well, what I was going to say is the way it pans out in practice is that we think it is absolutely important, and in the structures that we'll design ourselves and upload, we'll want to be pretty sure that we've built them and tested them and they're pretty sound. Even then, with self-assembly, you have to caveat that by going, you guys have to be careful of this, that, and that. You have to be reasonable. You have to do this. You have to do that.
Yeah,
but we're not there to hold your hands.
Okay.
And that's the kind of the byproduct of putting it out in the wild and saying you can build it anywhere in the world is you're not there. But the social contract that you're trying to encapsulate is to say, you as whoever's doing it also have to understand that our typical roles aren't what they normally are. Yeah. I'm not taking responsibility for every aspect of this for you. What I'm saying is the thing I've shared, I've tried and it stacks up, and I've talked to my engineers and I've done what a normal architect would do, and I'm pretty confident about it. Yeah. You still have to be careful. If you change any part, which is the whole open source thing, I'm not there to hold your hand. I don't know what you've done and I can't validate that. So why do it is the question from a protections point of view. And the benefit, the reason we do it, or put it out there as an idea, is because we think the benefit is to say something far more valuable and disruptive at scale can happen when you stop trying to manage everything in protected silos that concern themselves too much with every possible liability. Yeah. And you actually say, here's the seed of an idea, but just put it out there in the public domain, that's it. If no one does it, no one does it. If they do it, there'll be certain realities, risks, etc. that emerge. But the concept that I think is caught on most, that is the thing that's really kind of captured people's imagination, is things like this idea that, wow, housing, this thing which is so high threshold, so hard to access, so fundamental to people, and you can build it in different ways. And people don't tell you that.
So is that your duty? Like, you feel that you've designed, you've fundamentally set out these principles, but you really feel that you have a duty to provide a level of housing to the wider public or the social, the 100% basically.
Yeah, it's part of what we're interested in, absolutely.
But then do you feel that this is kind of not finished?
Yeah, I think...
Did you never intend it to be finished? Do you feel like you should stop now?
No, I think we won't stop now.
Okay.
But I think the question of when is it finished, part of the other sort of take on it as an open project is that it'll never be finished insofar as people will always do better with it than we've done, and this has already happened in the real world because these guys have done stuff that we didn't have the time to do. Yeah. If we'd have, if this was a job where we were waiting for the fees before we did anything, and we got healthily paid, and we looked at the hours that we can pay for, and we figured out what we can work to, then we can improve it. But the reality is, actually, maybe it never wants to be finished. The question is not even what does a wiki house do, because it's currently a single story. Does it do two? Our engineers think so, but we haven't tested it yet, so I won't say it does. All these things. So, what does it actually do? Is it a real house? Does it deal with some of the real complexities?
Well,
no, it doesn't. But what it does is it unlocks an idea, and that's all we wanted it to do. The seed of an idea that, hey, access to new forms of technology, and some of them don't. There's another kind of a misconception about wiki house. I was just earlier mentioned Bigfoot, CNC, and projects like that. Right, one of the criticisms of in practice, yes, it is a problem, but one of the critiques that came out early on was, CNC machines. Who's got a CNC machine? It's crazy. It's only the kind of 1% that have access to a CNC machine. Probably, if you look across the globe, that's probably true. But that's the undercurrent to this, which is maybe the thing people don't yet know about, is projects like Bigfoot, which is just an embryonic project, but what it is it's an open source CNC machine. Okay. The designs are online, the information's online. You buy the kit. Okay, it still has some raw materials that you need, like a drill bit and stuff. Yeah. But what it is it's like a wiki house. It's a plywood structure that you bolt together and fix together with a flat bed and a kind of almost like a hand drill on a rig that you can plug a laptop or any sort of computer numerical control into. And suddenly you can print a CAD file again. Now, the cost of buying the pile and putting it together, particularly if you've got the time and energy on your hands and a hacksaw to do it yourself, could be next to nothing. And so suddenly even the tools are starting to be democratized. Yeah. So to come back to what I was saying before, the undercurrent of the project like this isn't that it necessarily solves all these real-world problems, because in this kind of thing, obviously it doesn't. It's all made of one material in plywood, it doesn't have any services in it, etc., etc. It doesn't generate power, etc., etc. But what it does is it sort of says, hey guys, look, if you've got ideas in the public domain, And as access to certain types of a tool become more democratized, and most importantly, knowledge starts being shared in a democratic way, thresholds, barriers to entry start dropping radically.
Yeah.
And then the question is, well, what does that actually unlock? So really, what is WikiHouse? It's the seed of an idea that we want everyone to start to think about and share, so that it goes off in directions that we never imagined it would, and takes a challenge of one of many global challenges that are deeply social. It takes a challenge like housing, which is currently really oligopolied. Just take the UK market. Who builds, 99% of the UK housing stock? How many companies?
But then, do you feel that this can actually, where can this fit in the UK housing crisis?
In its current state?
Yeah.
Next to nowhere.
Right.
Because there's still a fair amount of work to be done on any one case to turn it into a habitable, enduring, robust structure. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. I mean, quite literally, as I say, people have already been talking to us about, hey, we like the concept, the idea so much that we'd actually like to try it for real. And suddenly, maybe totally going back to what our read stage is, maybe someone comes along and goes, hey, I'd like a house, I'd like to engage as an architect in the traditional sense, please use a WikiHouse structure.
Yeah.
Oh wow, okay, now we have to solve some real problems.
Well, that would be your dream, surely. Well, I don't know, that would be quite...
It's one of them. To be honest, personally, I've been more excited by seeing what these other people around the world, the guys in New Zealand, have been doing with it and stuff, than necessarily building one into a fully finished structure. I mean, of course, that would be great, and it's one of our big next steps is if people don't just... For people to not just get bored of this as a total fad and up of an idea, we have to keep working to go to the point where we say, look, this thing that started as a sort of initial idea and a few sheets of plywood and a CNC mill, talking about the Bigfoot thing, in order to complete some of this accessibility and threshold story, which is really what we're talking about here. The project in Brazil, we've been talking to the guys in the US that first came up with the Bigfoot, who are kind of basically hobbyists, enthusiasts of CNC machining, who said, can we build a CNC machine for X $100 instead of buying them for 20,000? And they've said, this sounds really exciting, and it's quite likely that they'll send some know-how and possibly equipment to Rio. So the plan will be, suddenly a shipment of stuff arrives, which ideally would just be some instructions and some drill bits and stuff. We saw some local plywood, and the whole process starts kicking into action. Now, for people to not just see that as a kind of arts piece, yes, we're going to have to keep working with our traditional architect's hats on to build a house that stands up. But once we do that, we've sort of completed, as I say, yes, that's the mission, but for me the bigger mission is to complete this space of which is hypothetically possible, where you go, hey, look, we've tried to put together a product lowering barriers to entry as much as we can to all the way along. What this whole sort of exploration has got us thinking about is, and this is, as I say, I mean, personally I've been doing a lot of work on the web and stuff recently. Most of that is really looking at tools that socialise, democratise and socialise. So basically, one of them is a kind of community Kickstarter, which it's actually ready and it'll be deployed.
Are these like maker labs that you...
Well, the Maker Labs is part of them, but on the web front, I mean, there's things like an app which is just lives on the web, doesn't have a physical presence as such, but the purpose of it is that community groups and individuals in their community can propose things that they'd like to do, which they currently have not the resource to do, say. They can propose things, they can evidence using this web app what activities they're actually taking, they can host events to get some support. They can gather crowdfunding, so you can donate, so that can rock up like a Kickstarter project. They can, and ultimately they can build evidence in a very kind of real way on the web that, hey, look, I may be a little guy, but I've got these people behind me locally, I've done all these actions, and the point is to build enough support for these things that suddenly bigger institutions, grant funding, government, private, even social impact investors, who normally would have to do a lot of work to even find out about Little Guy, can suddenly go, this is a really great local project. We'll give it 10 grand to support it, or 50 or 100. Now, I'm giving you an isolated other project we're working on, but what I mean is you can sort of see a common thread there again, that the underlying intention is about saying you can use certain technologies, certain social thinking, certain design solutions to start to democratise and lower the barriers to entry for a whole load of people. And for us as architects, maybe that's one of the biggest architectural spaces of possibility.
Really interesting. But it's kind of like, that's then talking about an economy. I mean, I've heard Alice Fings speak about it, like an economy based on reputation, like what we see today of like Wikipedia and everything like this. But then you've tied it back to like an institution, so that you have to then still have this traditional economy. Like, do you ever sort of actually feel that it could entirely shift towards this like alternative economy, basically?
I think certainly we're already seeing in various domains that happening.
Okay.
I think there are a whole load of interesting kind of edge cases that emerge that kind of make the news stories, that, you know, whether it's sort of in the tech making spaces, like the sort of, you asked about the maker thing earlier, you know, again, a very real, you know, so the guys that do the Bigfoot CNC thing are makers in the current real sense of the word. They're kind of the guys who are like the hacker end of physical fabrication. Equally, there's projects like, you know, in the 3D print space, like this have you heard of RepRap?
No, but okay.
Okay, so RepRap is another. These are maybe just interesting things to look at for fun, basically. RepRap is it's a brilliant project. It came out of Bath University, a guy there, it is an open source 3D printer, where effectively it's loosely made of like aluminium, I think, rods, metallic rods, and plastic connectors, which are themselves 3D printed. So you can imagine like a tent-like structure. So you put up the frame, it's got a rig on it, with effectively as few necessary bits of electronics and moving parts to make it work. And, you know, a spool with some plastic, and it prints plastic. Now, okay, it's not, the resolution is not as high as obviously industrial grade 3D printers, but that's not the point. The point is the cost of it is next to nothing. And suddenly you can go from a CAD file over here, you know, notionally hit the print button, and there's a little printed object. Now, you know, if you get to a point where that, which is purely a democratized concept, very much like the Bigfoot thing, very much like what we were trying to say with Wikicats, really. If you take that and you sort of say that's one end of the spectrum, which is kind of at the bottom, the grassroots, now, at the other end of the spectrum is like existing professionals with protective professional titles and the rest of it, and, you know, high skilled industry, for example. Now, there's a lot of space in between those two things, and stuff's starting to happen that's really quite interesting. Like, taking the 3D print analogy, 3D printers are now available for a fraction of the cost that they would have been 5 years ago, and they're dropping every year. So Kickstarter, again, here you can see the metaphors being mixed in. Kickstarter, which is a crowdfunding platform, in last year saw 10, maybe more 3D print related projects being crowd-funded. So suddenly you're sort of saying, okay, this is still tiny fractions of the global population, it means nothing. But there's a sort of narrative there which we're fascinated in, which is like, okay, so X number of people in the crowd, maybe it was only 10 with a lot of money, or maybe it was 1,000 with a few pounds each. But sort of enough of a public story and interest was generated, and someone came along and said, hey, I've got some technology in my head or in practice, and I can build a 3D printer, and when I finished it, it'll cost £1,000 to buy, next year it'll be 500, and the year after it might be 100. Who wants to pay me? And a whole bunch of normal people go, hey, I'll put a tenner into that idea to get one when it's ready or whatever. Okay, so what's happening? Suddenly you're getting, here's some traditional high-skilled, high-threshold problems, and here's a bunch of hackers. In the middle, the mass market maybe will start to catch up. And again, I mean, I'm spinning a big story, but what I'm trying to say is, like, yes, we have to accept things like our traditional responsibilities and roles, and we'll never turn our backs on those, because the reality is it doesn't matter what happens at the bottom end of the long tail. You know, what matters is that there's certain people who will always have more experience, even if you forget education, just more experience of solving specific problems in specific domains, and those people will always be good steers for other people. Equally, there are certain people who have access to information and knowledge that other people just don't.
Yep.
You know, that may be because the cost is still so high that the knowledge about how to 3D print is just not something anyone normally has. You know, but what we think is the whole point of technology and design, well, it's not the whole point if you don't believe it is, but for us it is that these things effectively change social and cultural reality and economic reality by starting to democratize and lower thresholds if you steer them in the right direction.
Yeah.
You still have a due diligence. You still have care to the people that you operate around. You still have to make sure you're doing things in the best way you possibly can. But that doesn't change the fact that rather than see what you're protecting as being the same niche bubble that it always was, you're embracing the fact that you're bringing a lot of other people along for the journey.
Surely what would be really interesting though is, you know, these are very like Western ideas and practices basically, and you talk of like WikiHouse and that it's going to Rio and solving, I don't know, the slums there or the favelas.
No, it's not really solving them.
Or
I'll tell you, it's not solving them at all, because actually the ability to build your own shelter in Rio, it's a bit like, it's not even teaching Granny to suck eggs, it's just insulting to think of, you know, we're quite aware that from a deeply political and intellectual point of view, the idea to say that WikiHouse is the sort of solution to Rio's favelas is just not the point. What we are interested in, just to really be explicit about this, is not that WikiHouse is a sort of physical, again, to ignore it as a physical sort of product. It's not that that physical product is the right thing to do there. What we want to do there, and this is to tell you a bit more about the bigger story of Rio briefly, but what we're really trying to do there is basically say, normally the idea of constructing shelter is a kind of fundamental human need. In places like the favelas, you do it very effectively with available materials. You know, some of the concepts that we love to talk about, you know, recycled products, and that's just a way of life for some people.
They know it.
They know it without even having to think about it, because it is their reality, and they're far better at doing it intuitively than we are. Now the point is, that's why the idea that even plywood is a suitable material to ship in mass bulk there might be the most ridiculously unsustainable and culturally inappropriate thing to do. But what we think is interesting is that there's a difference, again, if you look at the holistic story rather than the end product. So, hey guys, what would it be to get a group of people together to have a real say in what gets built for them and why? So it's not just one individual doing it themselves for kind of the base issues of whatever, survivability, shelterness. It's actually a community effort. And again, this is not to belittle anything that's actually going on the ground, because some of the greatest real social economies and things go on in places that we choose to turn our back on, like the favelas in Rio. So again, the idea that it needs us to arrive in order to get people to talk to each other is ludicrous. But as I say, each thing taken in isolation is like, it sounds like we're, you know, not megalomaniac as such, but more that we're sort of imagining that somehow the West has to go in and inject some intelligence.
Have some great, I don't know.
That's really not what it's about. It's about, as I say, trying to imagine this holistic ecosystem of going, hey guys, look, this thing, take community consultation as an idea. In the current architectural context and development context, what does it really mean? Have you been to a community consultation?
No.
Right. This is slightly generalising, but I don't really think it is.
Go for it.
But basically, community consultation involves, like, we've already done loads of thinking about the right way to do things as we know, so now we're going to turn up for a single day's event, you know, in whatever venue, and you're going to rock up and you're going to get to voice your opinions, and we'll really listen, and then we'll go away and we'll do what we were going to do anyway. More or less. And again, that's being a bit harsh. But what I mean is,
well, I don't know.
I mean,
probably about right.
Exactly. So the point is, okay, fine. So community consultation is one thing, but as I say, going back to what I was saying about this holistic story, you've kind of got, okay, what happens when you present people with an idea about technology that they may or may not have current access to or know about. So take a big foot CNC machine. You go, hey guys, see all these parts lying in this room? We're going to assemble them into a machine, and here's where, if I was being really brutally honest about the current limits of some of these things, I'd say here's where actually people could start to really dig holes into the meta picture, which is, wait a minute, don't you still have to plug it into a laptop and the internet
Yeah.
and other sort of deeply technological infrastructural
Western.
things that people do not necessarily get for free?
Yeah.
Fine. But again, it's not to say it's perfect, it's just what the underlying intention is. What is the internet? Fundamentally, it's a thing that people are battling hard to keep as much as possible. The World Wide Web is a sort of public domain thing. It's like deliberately not in the control of a single government. If you want to be cynical, you might say, well, actually, yeah, but someone's got a handle on the tap, and the US are watching everything, and so are we, and all this stuff. Fine. But the truth is that the democratized principles of the web, the sort of Tim Berners-Lee vision, and everything that came before that, is a fundamentally democratic social vision. Okay. So taking the idea of the web, yes, you need to plug some tech in, which is like a MacBook. Oh God forbid, But
it's becoming more.
Things are moving that way. Arduinos, hacks, even circuit boards that you can now get the bits put them together and start programming yourself. Programming languages, software programming languages, pretty much all out there for anyone to learn, change and read. And I'm sort of dreaming, but what I'm trying to say is you can see the underlying ecosystem story that we're trying to tell. Like, you arrive in a place, and rather than just go, hey guys, we're going to teach you how to build, no, that's not what it's about. Hey guys, we're going to teach you how to make a house, no, hey guys, we're going to teach you how to talk to each other, that's not what but it's like, okay, let's all get together, let's have a little story all together, right, here's some bits, let's put them together, you guys all get involved. And that's the other thing that WikiHouse really actually does very well, I must say, is, and it's almost cliche to say, but it's absolutely true, that there's this idea of community making, communal making. Yeah. And again, this is so not new, like the barn raising thing.
Yeah, we'll all get together to put up this.
Exactly, right?
First.
But the most enjoyable part of doing the WikiHouse is definitely not sitting in SketchUp trying to make models that are good enough to maybe run on a script. Yeah. The best part is a load of bits arrive and a bunch of people who maybe don't even know what you're doing rock up and go, oh, this looks fun. And then people get involved and suddenly the thing goes up.
So kind of like out of Rio, do you not feel like the most interesting... You've had like the education and you have the technology here and you've created this. You take it to Rio and they have such a better understanding than you about how to live in those conditions and what it's right, and you're leaving them with, you're providing them with the CNC machine, and you're going to see what happens basically, and kind of what comes back and what they do with that is kind of what it's all about.
In a sense, yeah. I mean, in a sense, even to take, yeah. I mean, you're right, but in a way, there's something slightly more to it than that, which is that one of the realities in places like Rio specifically are that, and again, it's a theme that we're interested in across the world. Really, is that certain things like the politics and the economics of land and access to physical land, sort of a physical piece of space, is becoming increasingly a highly contested thing. Just like everything, an overpopulated world, differentials in life, kind of in living standards and sort of wealth and everything else. But one of the things that we're sort of specifically looking at, having, as I say, worked with big guys on the ground there, is that, there's a lot of political realities in Rio de Janeiro, like the fact that something like 60% of the population live in the favelas. I mean, I might be wrong in that stat, but there's a really substantial amount of the populace that you don't see on the, travel brochures, and that even, being a bit controversial at it, but even the powers that be choose to turn their back on. Okay. The fact is, some of the most thriving economy on the ground and some of the biggest population density is actually in these places. So you can either keep turning your back on them, or you can sort of go, well, how can we find ways to start to talk to them on different threads? Now, the CNC machine being deployed and seeing what gets made, and it's part of it. We're sort of saying, are there any new tools that it's worth providing in these areas? Because maybe the tool arrives and they'll go, you know what, this is actually slower and less accurate than me doing it by hand. I prefer to do it by hand anyway. And then you go, right, so that was just a bad idea. But what I was going to say is that the real undercurrent is to get to a point where you can say, look guys, what we're actually doing with this thing it's all part of a social narrative, it's all part of an open source story, but what we're actually trying to do is build a space which is an unpoliticised space as possible in the given context. So, trust for the police, very, very low.
Okay.
Trust for the state, virtually non-existent. Trust for your neighbours, depends, sometimes really healthy, sometimes really not. How many spaces, even ignoring me and just taking the UK, taking London,
Yeah.
how many genuinely commons, i.e. unpoliticised, socially prevalent spaces are out there? Either you're in a building that might present a beautiful lobby and a lovely public face, but it's private land, fundamentally commercialised or private land. You know, there was a load of interesting debates around things like Westfields when it opened. You know, the shopping mall. You know, everyone goes, "Oh, this is great public space." People, actually, there's something deeply politicised, economy-driven, and controlled about how that space is operated.
Yeah.
How many?
More London's more,
Yeah, exactly. How many genuinely public or civic institutions are there? And when you think about it, increasingly, that's not the way things have happened. That's not the kind of economy we've tended to operate in. What's interesting is that similar, it's not the same, but it's similar sort of realities exist on the ground in Rio, albeit the fabric of those and the kind of institutional reality is quite different. The politicisation and the control of space and access to freedoms is still very, very real. So part of the real thing with trying to act, why are we actually trying to build a physical structure called a wiki house, that we call a house in Rio?
Yeah.
What we're actually trying to do is engage a load of people in the process of coming together to put something up, having as many arguments or agreements or enjoyment in the process as they will, coming to a joint idea of assembly, putting the thing up, and suddenly what we've created is not actually anything to do with the quality of the shelter or the quality of the building, and is it a better idea that it's made of wood, not corrugated metal, because it can't be disassembled as easily, blah, blah. It's not that. It's actually saying, look, in the process of rolling out this long, slow project, we've tried to create a new civic structure, which is, in its DNA, it feels open.
Hello.
Sorry, James. Really sorry.
It's okay.
A bit of a mix-up problem at home. You alright, Nick?
Yeah, good. How you doing? Cool. Yeah. So you enjoy this?
I think he's the best guy to have
It's
on
really
this
interesting.
side of the table anyway, but yeah. How's it going?
Yeah, good. Yeah, I was just talking about Rio. Cool. Yeah. But yeah, so that you do see what I mean. There's a sort of slightly romantic vision of the thing being kind of civic in kind of as deep a way.
Is that still not a bit patronising though? Like,
well, it depends. I mean, it depends which aspect of it. If you take a single aspect as patronising, like the fact that that it needs us to be there to put it together, then yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and that's the danger of it. And it could go terribly wrong in many ways, not only from a kind of in terms of its narrative, but actually on the ground, it could just go terribly wrong.
I mean, because do they want you there?
Well, what's interesting is they don't want me there, and in fact there's chances that I won't even be there personally.
Yeah.
But the guys that we're working with on the ground, who are, so again, a bit of backstory, but really quite important to the project, to that project, you know, there's an organisation on the ground there who come from there. The guy at the centre of it was born and brought up in the favelas.
Okay.
And again, it sounds really patronising this, but in the kind of boy done good sense, he's actually from there. He has deep networks, he has lots of trust, he knows how things actually operate, but he's one of those people who, because he's endemically kind of social as a person and kind of good mediator and good at, he's actually done an amazing job of widening awareness, connecting to people in government, in institutions that would choose to normally turn their back, and he's an intermediary with really, really kind of real impact in a way that me sitting here in London has no idea what I'm talking about. Now, the fact is, the Rio project would not be able to happen without those people. Him and his organisation. There's a load of people around him. They are the ones who are actually going to do this. We are simply facilitating it with some ideas about what we think paints, as I say, a civic story around the whole thing. Now, it just so happens that these individuals find real resonance in what we're saying. Maybe they're an isolated case, but they're the ones that actually know how they want to play this out. They're the ones that are telling us about the issues of deep political politicisation of space and access, and they're the ones that want to do a project that is seen to come from them, from the ground, which is actually in community interest, control, ownership, etc., etc., etc. So I hope that it's those sorts of relationships that actually mean that rather than just being a patronising experiment of Western injection, it's sort of here's some ideas and here's some tools, here's some thoughts about how we would imagine those tools deploying, but actually you guys are going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, so you're injecting like your Western, I don't know, experience and everything, and it's all about this like lateral power basically, but really, is it kind of also about what they're going to throw back at Western values almost? You know?
Yeah, you've nailed it. The guy, Jimmy, the guy that we work with here, who's the kind of go-between. He's the guy that we knew here, who knows the guys on the ground in Brazil, who's coming all the time. And his personal, real interest, his areas of research and interest, are exactly what you've just hit the nail on the head.
Because he thinks he has something to show Western.
Yeah, he thinks that the real economies, the healthiest economies in some ways, the least legacy weighed and already oligopolied and monopolised economies are actually on the ground in places like Rio.
It's been talked about for quite a few years. I don't know if didn't Kevin MacLeod or something do something in India in the slums, and how is this like the city of the future almost, and this is the economy that it operates in, the sharing and all this land value.
Exactly right.
It's true though, we have to be careful how people understand the involvement that we're having in to what extent it's about giving someone a tool and to what extent people have already got. You know, you can go to some slum place in Mexico, people have already got they've got their own version of a city. They've got their own,
they also have their own version of WikiHouse. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, they're much better versions because they're actually
so
deal with real
problems.
problems.
But the whole WikiHouse platform, the whole idea is really to gather information and put it back into the system, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that you're effectively just creating this repository for different ways of doing things.
That's why I said it's about the whole
and it
ecosystem
flowing.
idea.
I guess we have to. For the moment, we're in a position where if we don't kickstart it off and instigate something, it kind of wouldn't maybe happen. But once it's started, I think our intention is to sit back and let people populate it.
The other thing, though, which I think is interesting, and this I don't think this is belittling or what's the word? It's not sort of just about kind of westernisation, imposing. Which is a real kind of, it's a very real thing, and it played out even in places like this in the heart of London, that sometimes it takes certain players to just recognise that they're being kind of intermediaries, sort of seeding ideas in enough different players' heads that stuff starts to happen. Now, if you turned your back on Rio and you did nothing, or rather, if we never got involved in Rio, because we didn't have to do this, you could say, yeah, they're just getting on absolutely fine. They're doing far better there than other parts of the world. But to be honest, what is the outcome of this thing so far in WikiHouse? And again, I've absolutely stated that I don't know if it's going to work, and I wouldn't put my hat on a thing and say this is the best building you'll ever build. Absolutely not. But what has happened is suddenly this thing, which it's westernised and it's whatever, but this thing called TED, say, has suddenly started telling a story in the mass media. Did they tell that story about Rio before this thing called WikiHouse got injected into the thing? No. Okay, is that a good thing or not? But something's happened there. It's the popular imagination has suddenly been seeded with an idea. Now, in different contexts, that plays out in different ways. So, taking place like this, it took someone to sort of talk the right language to the right politicians, to the right economists, to suddenly go, hey guys, look, actually you guys can work together and something amazing can happen, we can tell the story.
Yeah.
Now, what's fascinating about the Rio project is already, as I say, Jimmy, the guy we're working with, and the guys on the ground, fundamentally there, have actually said, hey, you know what's really fascinating? With the money coming in from TED, which is not a huge amount of money, $2,000 really, the government in Brazil are going to match fund it. And you go, what the heck? I mean, they could have been pouring money into the favelas last year. Why are they doing it now? So again, I mean, there's this sort of thing that, yeah, if it's, and quite honestly, there are times when we are deeply self-critical, and we believe that's a strength. You know, we hope that's a kind of strength. So we're definitely not trying to argue that we're doing it much better than anyone else. But we sort of understand that in different contexts, you can play an important role just by sort of even the way you tell a story, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we maybe, I think what's really interesting as well is like basically the platform that you've created, and I don't know, like imposing and then it coming back. How does it actually like come out? Like the duty is maybe, I don't know, you've provided like this coding and this platform that's online and is going to be democratised, you know, in the near future. Everyone's going to have a Mac or something, I don't know. And yeah, internet's there.
Yeah,
and
Apple would love to think
yeah,
so.
yeah, well, maybe. And how does it actually like come out, almost?
Well, to be honest, I'm not sure that WikiHouse ever will go beyond a certain scale as a thing. I think what WikiHouse is at the moment is a scale of idea, a scale of story. You know, very real example, right? Very real example. The WikiHouse website has got several million, I think, hits. The number of people who've contributed to design is probably like 10. So does that mean, and the number of WikiHouses in the real world that have ever been built, probably 0.
Okay.
So
What do you mean that we don't know?
yeah, I mean maybe that. Well, we know that there are some funny little things that have happened that are quite cool, like an office in Italy where they kitted out their whole office as a kind of wiki office, and they
Furniture and
yeah, and
okay.
they designed their own.
Yeah, I did a Skype
fittings
chat with
and-
them and then I heard nothing, and then 2 months later got a video of them making their office using this system.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then what they did is they started uploading. They started uploading files on their own sharing thing, which has nothing to do with WikiHouse website. So they designed some light fittings made of CNC cut ply again, and they uploaded. You know, CNC plywood does not solve the problems of the universe. But the point is, again, that suddenly these guys who could have just gone and built an office and paid a contractor to do it the normal way and done a one-off, went, this is really fun, let's do something and let's put it online. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
But aren't there like really bigger things that it can do as well? In that, so like, like Favela's land values and how they approach, they adopt this. I don't know. It comes back, and how does that come out here? Like, almost. You said earlier, like this can't solve the UK housing crisis, and
Well, in its,
but
in
if
its
it went
current
if
state.
it went over to Rio,
Yeah.
you know, and they then looked at, we can do it like this, and this is our land values, and this is our economy that we think is very interesting for the future, and this comes back, but it's still on the internet. How do you actually get that out?
In order for it to come back, what I think is interesting is it needs the right people to tell the right story to the right people. Again, this is so in other words, it won't come back just on its own, because actually already there's a load of stuff to learn. It's just most people aren't really interested, or they don't have access, or they don't know the story, or whatever, you know. I think the point is what would be great, and what we will do in the course of doing the Rio thing, is tell a story to the world about what's actually going on, tell all the incidental benefits. In some ways, you know, if some bits of it fail, that's great, because that will be us being brutally honest about the stuff that we just don't know the first thing about, and that will be almost make it a much better story than if it all just goes great and we make it look rosy.
Yeah.
So yes, there'll be stuff to learn and come back. Now the thing is, I think the bigger undercurrent is actually going to be about saying, well, where does that story get recycled in a way that plays out certain political realities and things which actually start enforcing change in different contexts, economic and political realities, and technological and technical realities and social realities. So basically, you know, again, this is a side thing, but we're currently working on a thing to try and put an institution into Old Street, which was in the news the other day, and we've
I know.
Yeah, and that has been, you know, okay, it's just broken, and we've sort of wondered how to presence ourselves so people start associating with us. But basically, what we're really doing on that, again, on Australia, is saying this image that people are doing that stuff is nothing. I mean, we put together a quick building proposal, but that's kind of, again, slightly irrelevant, as I said in the beginning to us. Yeah, something has to happen, it has to be good, and blah, blah, blah. But the real thing there is we're trying to inject, again, a commons, space in the heart of London, that's a building, that is a sort of is a symbol of social institution. But the bigger important thing is, and this is the harder thing to really make happen, this lives outside of the Reba scale that we were talking about earlier, but it's the hardest thing to realise, is to get all the right players involved and all the right social intentions and all the right economic realities to basically go, this thing that's going to get built, you know what, you can think what you like about the building, you can design it or not, whatever. When you walk into it, it's yours.
Aren't you in a bit of a catch-22 though with that? Because like, well, I think it's really great that I think it's really great that you've like proposed this, and it's kind of probably what's needed, and you've kind of campaigned for it basically, and you've then been granted that and given permission to do that, but you don't have to build it. But you kind of talk of like, I don't know, like not. You actually have to design and structurally, but you talk of like not. Oh, sorry, I don't quite.
No. What you're saying is, are we shying away from the thing of actually doing it, right?
Mm.
Well, I mean, in that, you're talking about Old Street.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean,
Just talking about.
But in that case, we see. I suppose it just depends on how you define what a project is and what the goals of the project are. It's like the goals of the project for us could be to design the institution and to make it happen, and not actually worry about what it looks like and spatially how it operates. I mean, I'm personally interested in that, but
yeah, well,
we could say that's the boundary of like where our interests.
No, we all are. The question is just where is it appropriate. So taking real political reality of this current on the street thing, right?
Yeah.
At the moment, we clearly are in a controversial position in the sense that there's a whole load of realities. There's a whole load of big money that's, it only took a few sentences of announcement for people to read into that, all sorts of things, some of which are very true. But here's a huge sum of money in a time when people want money. Here's a thing called Tech City that's all the buzz, and actually, when you ask the guys on the ground what they're really doing, they're basically just getting on, they're trying to do some innovative stuff themselves, blah, blah, blah. Here's us thinking we know what we're talking about, and we're just sort of exploring the space. And here's a building that people think looks great or not, as in many cases, and they think that that's the building that's going to get built. Now, the fact is, between now and the end, if it makes sense, and it isn't stepping on everyone's toes, and it isn't not in the public interest for us to do the building, then we'll do the building. And when we come to do the building, we'll go, right, what's the best way to actually design this building? What's the best materials to actually build it out of? What story does it need to tell? Who needs to be involved? How do we talk to those people? Blah, blah, blah. And we'll design a building. And it will be another process, just like every other architectural process, but hopefully as civic as we think we can make it. But if it doesn't make sense for us to design a building, because of whatever reason, because the whole world thinks that we're just profiteering out of a project, which a lot of people currently I'm sure do, they think, who are these guys, Architecture 00, to be working on this £50 million project, blah, blah, blah. If it doesn't make sense...
I think it's just interesting that you've been... But you've campaigned for it, you've come up with the idea, there needs to be something there, and this money, I don't understand it entirely, but this money's then just been granted to you. But surely if that is, shouldn't that have gone to public competition?
No, it hasn't been granted to us.
Okay.
That's what I mean. See, this is the point, is people think that we've been given 50 million to do an architecture job, but we haven't. We don't have that money. We haven't got the job. We may not build the building. It may go to Norman Foster, Richard Rogers, or anyone else.
All that we've done really essentially is seed an idea about the thing called the Open Institute, which is loosely based on the Tech City idea that something should be around so open roundabout. And we then, it was a bit of almost like experiment within the office to see if we propose something, how far can we take it? And we were pretty surprised that obviously it got this far, because initially we just did we imagined a competition and we did a presentation as if there'd been a competition called the roundabout, but that's just to give us something to work with, wasn't it? And the roundabout itself.
I'll tell you what it is. It's basically, as I said, it's this thing that what you're doing at every stage is seeding an idea in someone's head and honestly, we like to think that we're kind of nice guys trying to do something we believe in. So behind the scenes, it's like sometimes what gets presented may seem to be just what it looks like on the tin, like £50 million new building.
That's the building. Okay, yeah.
Behind the scenes, quite a lot of the time, we're kind of going, okay, it's gotten this far, now we have to do the next move, and underlying all that is this thing that we really believe in, that is what we're trying to do, is something that we believe in, which is make it real in the world in a way that is not currently real, or at least not very often, that it is possible to build a building with private, public, little guy money involved, a collective of effort. You know, it's not like them, us and them, the state, 50 million, Karen, boo. We're not conservatives, necessarily. Some of us maybe, some of us aren't. But the point is, we're not politicised about it. It's that we're basically saying, yeah, right now there'll be a thing that, the government's put 50 million and everyone thinks it's going to be terrible. It, hopefully it won't be, from our point of view. But what we think is that, okay, what's the next step? The next step is, okay, right, how do we work with that, with other people involved, and kind of prove that the world is slightly more than the silos of institutions and organisations that we currently think it is.
You're quite a bit ahead then. I don't know. Are they ever going to catch up? Or feel?
Well,
That's what we're trying to do basically. But someone's always got to publicise.
But in this
it
case,
back to.
in this case, what we're saying is, rather than a lot of our jobs, there's already a brief. Someone's already come up with a competition brief, and we decide whether we enter that competition or not. And then we have to meet the brief, and then we either win it or we don't win it based on some renderings, some plans, and how good we come across in the interview. But we can actually build a brief for a really great project that we think should happen. And then if we don't build it, well, we've still had quite a lot of valuable input into building what we think is actually a smart thing to do, rather than us. Most architecture competitions, you kind of reacting kind of slightly dumbly against a brief that someone's set, and they may not have thought.
I'll tell you what failure, for us, failure in this thing would look like the following. For us, absolute failure in this project would look like 50 million's been announced, it's going to go into the thing called Tech City, to Old Silicon Roundabout, whatever the current working title is, the building that's out there, because we didn't necessarily ever say that, it's just what's being said, fine.
Okay.
So it's going to go in. What would failure, this is me maybe talking personal opinion, what would failure look like? It would basically look like the money goes down, it does genuinely get committed, the project goes ahead, we get ostracised, we're not ready to deal with it, fine. We don't do the building, fine. The civic ideas behind it get sidelines because actually they're not really in anyone's best interest, so it's not a commons thing, it's not an open thing. So, another developer and vested businesses get involved as and when it happens, and the money has to come from somewhere. And a great big building gets built on Old Street.
Then they make a competition.
It looks like a glowing box of lights and costs 50 million. For me, this is sort of, we're giving you the whole backstory, but basically for me that would be total failure in this project as 0-0.
Because the idea was never carried through.
Because none of the ingredients of the underlying thinking ever actually came to fruition. Yeah. The hardest chess game in this whole thing is trying to go from something where you have a kind of intention that you hope in your best thing is like a good intention, and you have to then make all the strategic plays to get some semblance of it into the real world. Now, there's another reality, which is that 0-0 do everything, they build the covers, they build the building, great, yeah, we'd love it. It doesn't have to be that, and actually none of our real intentions hinge off that. But what I'm saying is, there are certain ingredients that for us are success, and those ingredients actually revolve far more around the social realities that the thing tells, and that's really what projects like that and WikiHouse and all these projects are actually about.
So it's kind of like, well, I think it's brilliant, like the idea of it, but you've kind of, it's almost like you've struggled because everyone else is pushing the other way.
Sometimes.
Like, and that it has to be tied back to, I don't know, an institution, or it then has to go into a building and a competition and all this, and it's all a bit dry, really, and it's kind of like what needs to be done to make that shift into that new economy, the new civic, that what you're trying to say becomes the norm, almost, because you're not doing the norm at all.
No,
and everyone's now fighting against you, basically.
But if we wanted to make life easy for ourselves, we could have proposed something much more commercial than that. Yeah. And that may have got...
But that's not what you're standing for.
No, of course, but that could have been a decision we'd take. We could make that decision on all of our projects at some point. Yeah. On all of our projects, we're trying to make decisions that are based on things that we actually want to do, because everyone's only got so much energy and time, and we're saying, where do we want to spend that most effectively? Because we want to feel like the work we're doing is meaningful without getting all rosy tinted about it. Like we do want to feel like we're doing
stuff that we're really into, and we want to get paid for it, obviously, so we're not a charitable organisation, but yeah, the other route would be to be much more commercial about these things, and then that would be much more sort of the mainstream.
But that's a bit defeatist, isn't it? Like, what do you actually feel needs to be done to like make so people are more on board with you?
Well, I'll tell you, I think you're right that in a sense sometimes you're fighting up, you're rowing against the current sometimes. But I think the other thing, which is just real life, and in a way it's kind of healthy real life, is that sometimes people have different views and ways of operating for very good reason. Different realities for different people mean different things. So, we can sit on the periphery. One could argue that actually we're already biased by the system because somewhere we get paid by whoever in whatever project. So doesn't that mean that we're already kind of conformists or being, driven by sort of other people's kind of political reality? The thing is, I don't think we're not. Okay, yeah. Basically, the bottom line is, I don't think that we're utopian in the sense that we sort of think that everyone else will do it this way and this way is the best. It's more just trying to work with people, basically that. I mean, the fact is, do we think that it's a bad thing that, Westminster City Council, in a typical way, and you can be as cynical as you like, help to make the hub happen? Absolutely not. That's amazing, that's great. Does that mean Westminster do a bad job everywhere else? No, but it just means that, in a sense, the strength is in the diversity of the kind of overall collective, and equally if the Conservative Party, or I shouldn't say that really, because it's not now Conservative Party is, the coalition. But what I mean is, I'm talking in the popular sense of it, should it be seen that the government put £50 million into this? Yeah, of course you can be cynical, and you could sort of say that the ideal would be that everyone chips in a tenner and everybody brings a brick and everybody does this and everybody, we're not communists and we're not utopianists, but we sort of think you work with the reality you've got and you hope that there's enough goodwill and strategic steer that what comes out the other end is like a really good output. Not everyone will love it, but it's a good output. And literally, this is what I mean. I'm fully prepared that on the WikiHouse project in Rio, it could just go absolutely pear-shaped in the sense that it could be like nothing that you'd associate with a normal, sensible way of building a building.
That it can't be transferred over.
That it can't be transferred over. The people on the ground hate us. And actually, as a strategic player, I would say it may be sensible for me as Nick to just stay well away. Not because I'm scared of going there, but because actually the point is if I go there, I'm just biasing the whole story. And that's not what we want.
Yeah.
I don't know. It remains to be seen, and we'll figure it out as we go along. But
when does it start?
Well, they've already earmarked a site where they want to at least get the parts delivered. So it's like a kind of. I think they said it's somewhere near the docks.
I mean, in that case, they might decide to just build, or not even build a house. But we're hoping they might build something which they then put the machine in, and that becomes a little factory that can do whatever is needed or wanted. I'd be a bit disappointed if things like this started appearing, because that's not what we.
It's already done. Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many. Obviously, they're solving loads of issues that we're only just thinking about.
I mean, to be honest, what I genuinely think may happen with enough coordination, because I do think the other thing is, to being really pragmatic, I don't believe just people left to their own devices. I don't believe in sort of necessarily designed by committee, or that people left to their own devices will just sort of kind of somehow coalesce and make something incredible. I think all things.
But that's what WikiHouse is. I don't know.
No, I wouldn't say that's what it is. I mean, basically, it's true that certain pockets of people who are driven and have ideas and enthusiastic steer and lead organisations. Again, this is a kind of fallacy of the open source thing, really.
Yeah,
That people think of open source as meaning everybody does it and everyone has access and it's sort of fully shared. Well, not fully shared, but it's fully engaged with in a flat way. What you find in real terms, like taking open source software projects. So everyone talks about Linux, which is like open source software, operating system. Probably the biggest OS for big servers around the world. Therefore, arguably in the real market, the real economy has done better than Microsoft and some of the massive Leviathan businesses out there in actually producing a viable product. Now, some people tell the story of Linux as being this product which is like made by everyone, it's fully a product. That's absolutely not true. If you go and look at how who contributed to the code, basically.
Yeah.
It was Linus Torvalds and 2-3 other guys did 90% of the work, and then a million people wrote a line of code that maybe was terrible and got changed again. The point isn't necessarily that everyone will build the wiki apps or everyone will know how to do it. Equally, it's not that everyone on the ground in Rio will sort of suddenly adopt this. I don't know what they're even going to adopt.
Okay, yeah.
It's more just that what I'm saying is that it always takes some people to kind of lead an idea, but once that idea operates, what's really important is in its DNA. So the thing about Linux fundamentally and the whole open source software movement is their real belief is that they've put something into the public domain, which means that if you want to take it and change it without them ever profiteering out of it, and you want to improve it at any point in time, you can do that. And so the whole long tail thing is basically, it's like a statistical reality. What happens is, if you take the world's population, you know, and you look at people that will build a house,
Right.
and the perceived quality of that house,
Okay.
you're going to get something that resembles a bell curve, or something statistically. In fact, it doesn't, because it's so skewed by the current economy, it probably looks like that.
Okay.
But what I mean is, the statistical reality is that you'll get a whole load of outliers doing stuff, you'll get a whole load of mainstream doing stuff, and you'll get lots of stuff in between. It's just the probabilities of X thing happen. Now, the open source thing is exactly that. It's like the widest possible base that you can build means that the majority will do nothing more than download it and use it. But a few outliers and an increasing spread of people will start contributing in really constructive ways, and then someone right in the periphery will do something incredible. And it's not known when. That's the whole, I mean, again, almost mathematically speaking, the whole power of the thing is you can't interpret from just looking at it what its past or future is and what its relative scale is. All you can see is that statistically, once you start taking measures on some scale, these things start to map into a kind of long tail. And basically, again, it's just that. The more control you isolate on anything in the hands of a few people, the less innovation, the less social impact, the less possibilities you are allowing to happen, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Perhaps I should let you get on. I feel I've taken.
Does this answer any? I mean, you're writing now.
Yeah, I was right. I'm writing an essay about. We have to look at like the duty of the architect, and I guess I was interested in this platform and this lateral power and this idea of a third industrial revolution where everyone can start manufacturing and producing, democratizing basically power and manufacture, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, because the other thing is there's we wrote a chapter in a book called Future Practice. I don't know if you've seen.
Oh, by
Rory
Hyde.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
That was Indy writing one of
Yeah.
our book.
I think I read a
That
bit of
sets
it.
out like more broadly sort of the 0-0 approach, really, and it probably just covers a couple of these things. Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you very much.
Yeah, I hope that was useful.
It's very interesting.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hope it adds something that isn't just noise to your